People often look away when they see my skin, wrinkled and crisscrossed with thick scars. They think I'm just a pitiful old woman who suffered a tragic accident. But they are dead wrong. These raised, uneven scars aren't just the aftermath of a fire. They are the map of the most devastating betrayal a mother could ever endure. Just imagine being engulfed in flames in the safety of your own bed, your flesh melting like wax, and as you drag yourself to the window, screaming for help, you lock eyes with your only daughter standing in the window across the yard. She wasn't there to call the fire department. She was standing there waiting for her own mother to turn to ash so she could inherit a fortune. I was 77 years old. With 60% of my body covered in third-degree burns, the doctors shook their heads and had my death certificate ready to sign. But they underestimated the will of a woman raised by the high desert. While they pumped me full of morphine, waiting for me to take my last breath, I was secretly using my mother's ancient herbal remedies to regenerate my own flesh right under their noses. I am Margaret, and I did not die that night. I rose from my own ashes to make the monsters pay. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your faith. There are stories that, no matter how painful, simply must be told. I dragged myself across the bed in desperation, trying to escape the flames that were already climbing up my legs. The pain was so great, I don't know how I didn't pass out right there. Every movement I made felt like I was tearing off a piece of my own skin that was already sticking to the burning covers. The air was growing thin, and the heat suffocated me just as much as the smoke. I felt certain I was going to die right there, charred in my own bed. I managed to fall to the floor, but there was fire there too. My entire nightgown was in flames now, stuck to my body as if it were part of my skin. I screamed for help, but my voice barely came out, hoarse from the smoke, lost in the noise of the fire consuming the timber of the house. The bedroom door had already turned into a wall of fire. There was no way out through there. That was when I saw the window, the only hope of escaping that hell. At that age, 77 years old, you don't have the strength or the agility of youth anymore. Every step toward the window was torture. The fire had already burned my feet, my legs, my arms, part of my face, the skin melting, dripping like wax. I will never forget the smell of my own burning flesh. It is a scent that sears itself into your memory, one that returns to haunt you in your darkest nightmares. I dragged myself across the burning floor, every inch a battle against hallucinatory pain. I reached the window almost without strength, my whole body shaking, my vision blurred by smoke and tears that dried in the heat before they could even run down my face properly. The glass was hot as coals when I touched it. I broke it with my elbow, cutting my arm that was already all burned, but I didn't even feel the cut amidst so much pain. The cool night air entered for a second, giving a small relief before being swallowed by the hungry fire that consumed everything. I didn't think twice. It was jump or burn to death. My room was on the second floor of the house, about 20 feet from the ground. At that moment, it didn't matter. I preferred to die from the fall than to continue feeling that hallucinatory pain of the fire eating my skin. I threw myself out without looking, without thinking about the consequences. Listen to me, folks. People talk about survival instinct, but trust me, until death is breathing down your neck, you have no idea how strong you truly are. In that moment, fear vanishes, leaving only one screaming command in your head: live. Never underestimate the will of an old woman who's seen it all. The wind from the fall even put out some flames on my clothes, but others kept burning. I fell right on top of the rose bushes that I had planted myself years ago. The impact was like 1,000 knives at the same time. I felt bones breaking, the air leaving my lungs all at once. I broke 3 ribs, my right arm, and injured my spine. But I was alive, out of that hell. Even so, some parts of my nightgown were still burning, stuck to my skin. I rolled on the grass wet with the night dew, trying to put out what remained of the fire. Every movement was indescribable agony. The pain was so much that I started to lose consciousness. Before passing out, I looked up and saw him in the window of my daughter's room, on the other side of the house, which hadn't caught fire yet. Richard, my son-in-law, looking at me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't surprise, nor concern. It was disappointment. Disappointment that I had managed to escape. The burns on my skin were agony, yes, but that cold look in his eyes, that hurt 1,000 times worse. And beside him, I thought I saw Sarah. She stood rigid, her face a mask of terrifying indifference. In that moment of agony, through the haze of smoke and pain, I didn't see a daughter horrified by her mother's suffering. I saw an accomplice. That belief broke my heart more than the fire ever could. Has anyone listening to this story ever been stabbed in the back by the person you trusted most? That ice-cold feeling running down your spine right in the middle of a fire. If you've been there, leave a comment. Let me know I'm not walking this road of healing alone. That was when I understood everything. It wasn't an accident at all. He had planned to kill me in that horrible way, poured the gasoline while I slept, set it on fire, and stood watching, waiting to see me turn to ashes. The last thing I remember before blacking out completely was the sound of sirens in the distance. Some neighbor must have seen the fire and called the fire department. I don't know how long I lay there on the grass, semi-conscious, feeling every inch of burned skin throb with a pain that not even in my worst nightmares could I imagine. Time seems to stop when the pain is that great. Seconds turn into hours. I woke up 3 days later at the hospital in Phoenix. They had transferred me there because Sedona didn't have the facilities to treat such severe burns. 60% of my body was burned, the doctors confirmed later. Most of it was 2nd and 3rd degree. Arms, legs, torso, part of the face and neck. "A miracle you're alive," was what the oldest doctor said, with that look of someone who had seen a lot of tragedy in life. "At your age, with this amount of burns, you shouldn't have even survived the trip here." He wasn't exaggerating. I learned later that the mortality rate for a woman of my age with burns covering more than 50% of her body is nearly 95%. The Bow score, a system doctors use to predict death in burn victims, essentially gave me a score of over 140, a death sentence by any medical standard. Statistics are powerful, but they didn't account for Margaret's grit or her ancestral knowledge. Stick around, because the specific combination of herbs she used to defy this death sentence is something you'll want to hear about. They calculate life with cold numbers on a page, but they forgot the most important variable, the will of a woman raised by the high desert. Science is wonderful, I don't deny that, but sometimes miracles only come to those who dare to defy the statistics and believe in the regenerative power of their own bodies. My skin wasn't just burned. The protective barrier of my body was gone, leaving me open to lethal infections that kill thousands of burn victims annually. I needed to understand what was happening to me to fight it. The fire had destroyed the epidermis and dermis, reaching the subcutaneous tissue. But I knew that if I could stimulate the deep tissue cells, life could return. The first days were a nightmare of pain. Even with morphine in my veins, it was as if the fire were still burning beneath my skin. Every dressing change tore pieces of me away with it. I screamed so much I went hoarse. The more experienced nurses would arrive at the room with tears in their eyes, knowing what was going to happen during wound cleaning. I had high fevers, infections, delirium. The doctors didn't give much hope. They said amongst themselves, thinking I couldn't hear, that it was a matter of days until my body couldn't take it anymore. That was when I started asking my daughter to bring some things from home. At first, she didn't understand. She thought it was delirium from the fever, from the strong medication. "Mom, you're not right in the head yet because of the meds." I know many of you listening right now might want to blame Sarah, call her stupid or heartless. But listen to me. Psychological manipulation is like boiling a frog. It happens slowly, sweetly, in the name of love, until even the smartest woman becomes blind to the trap. Don't be too quick to judge, because sometimes the prey doesn't even know she's being hunted. Sarah hesitated, telling me, "Mom, you need to rest." But I insisted. I needed her help. Sarah, my only daughter, still didn't believe that it was her husband who had done that to me. She thought it had been an accident, that I had left a candle burning, the stove on, senile old lady stuff, as she herself said when she thought I wasn't listening. Even so, she brought what I asked for. Herbs I had stored in the pantry, the oils I prepared myself, the knowledge I inherited from my mother, who was a midwife and healer. Hazel Smith was respected all over the high desert as the woman who saved more lives than any graduated doctor. Since I was a little girl, I helped her prepare the remedies to care for the sick. I saw her save people with burns almost as severe as mine, using only what nature offered. When the nurses left at night, I secretly applied the herbal mixtures to the most burned parts. I used a potent blend of desert plants remedies I had extracted myself at the ranch. I wasn't inventing these cures, I was remembering them. And I wasn't alone. According to the World Health Organization, nearly 80% of the world's population, particularly in Asian and African nations, relies on traditional plant-based medicine for their primary health care. Yet, here in this sterile American hospital, my wisdom was treated as witchcraft. I mixed the chaparral, which contains nordyhydroguaretic acid, a potent antioxidant, with the cooling gel of the aloe. I knew that while modern medicine sterilized the wound, my mother's mixture instructed the skin to remember how to grow. Now, don't you go rolling your eyes thinking this is just superstition. Nature is the world's greatest laboratory. Long before modern pills, our ancestors survived thousands of years thanks to these very roots and leaves. Do any of you still keep the old folk remedies passed down by your grandparents? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear about them. It stung like the devil at first, but then came a relief that not even the expensive hospital drugs could give. I did this in the early hours with the help of one of the younger nurses, who was curious about the old ways and helped me in secret. After a week of this double treatment, the modern medicine of the doctors and the ancient wisdom of my mother, the doctors themselves began to be amazed at the speed of recovery. The wounds they thought would necrose started showing signs of healing. The fever went down, the infections receded. The oldest doctor went so far as to say he had never seen anything like it in 50 years of practice. A 7-year-old lady surviving burns of that degree was already extraordinary. Improving at that speed was inexplicable to his science. While the body healed, the mind worked. I began to put the pieces together, to understand my son-in-law's diabolical plan. Richard had arrived in my daughter's life about 3 years earlier, when she was already in her early 52s, single, thinking she wouldn't marry anymore. He appeared like Prince Charming, full of attention, full of affection. In 6 months, he was already living with us. At first, I confess I even liked it. Sarah had always been very lonely, dedicated to her studies and then to the family businesses. I thought she had finally found a partner, but soon I began to notice strange things. Richard always asking about the land deeds, about how much the markets yielded, wanting to participate in meetings with the managers. At first, I thought it was good. I thought he wanted to help. After all, since my Robert died 15 years ago, it was just me running everything alone, with the help of Sarah, who took care of the numbers more. I was already tired, age weighing on me. But little by little I realized that his interest wasn't helping, it was taking over. He began to distance Sarah from me, saying that I was going senile, that I didn't know how to manage properly anymore, that I was going to end up losing everything her father had built with so much sweat. I didn't know it then, but I was becoming a statistic in a silent epidemic. In the United States alone, approximately 1 in 10 Americans aged 60 and older have experienced some form of elder abuse. Even more heartbreaking is that in nearly 60% of elder abuse and neglect incidents, the perpetrator is a family member, often an adult child or a spouse. Financial exploitation of the elderly costs older Americans over $2.6 billion annually. Richard wasn't just a bad son-in-law. He was a predator following a playbook used against millions of seniors who are made to feel useless so they can be robbed. He planted doubts in her head about my sanity. He even brought a doctor friend of his to the house, who after a half-hour conversation said I had senile dementia and should be removed from the business. That was when my eyes opened for good. I changed my will, took away his access to the accounts, warned the market managers that they should only accept orders from me or Sarah. He must have found out. On the eve of the fire, he had gone to the county recorder's office to check the status of the deeds. I learned later, from a neighbor who worked there, that he left furious upon discovering that I had changed everything, leaving the majority directly to Sarah, with a life estate for me, and a clause that prevented her from transferring any asset to her husband. That was the last straw for him. That same night, we had dinner together. I remember him being especially attentive, serving my plate, filling my glass of juice. I suspect to this day that he put some drug in it to make me sleep heavier. I went to bed early that night, around 9 p.m., tired like never before. I slept like a rock. I only woke up with the room already taken by fire and the strong smell of gasoline. He had thrown fuel all over the room, on the curtains, on the bed, even on top of me, and set it on fire. The plan was for me to die sleeping, intoxicated by the smoke before even waking up with the burns, or that even if I woke up, I wouldn't be able to leave the burning room. What he didn't count on was my will to live, greater than the fire that tried to consume me. The days in the hospital went by. The scars began to form. The doctors said I would need several skin grafts, plastic surgeries, years of treatment. But I knew, from the knowledge my mother had passed on to me, that the herbs I used in secret were accelerating the cure in a way traditional medicine couldn't explain. The nurses began to notice that my wounds were improving faster than normal, even for someone younger. Their curiosity was greater than their skepticism. As I mentioned earlier, Jennifer, that older nurse who had been working there for 30 years, became my lifeline. One night, she caught me applying the ointment. Instead of scolding me, she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "My mother was also a healer. I've never seen anyone recover so fast from burns like this. Teach me that preparation." And so, little by little, the treatment I was doing in secret became almost official, with the silent complicity of the nursing staff, who saw the results and didn't question them. Almost a month after the attack, the police finally began to investigate thoroughly. At first, they had treated it as an accident, a fire caused by a short circuit or a forgotten candle. My daughter was reluctant to believe that her husband would be capable of such cruelty. But the neighbor in the house next door had one of those modern security cameras, the kind that records everything. And in the recording, you could clearly see Richard leaving the house in the middle of the night, shortly before the fire started, and returning minutes later. That footage was the smoking gun she needed, transforming Margaret from a victim into a formidable opponent. But wait until you hear how she orchestrated her return from the dead to catch them completely off guard. The proof that was missing. When Sarah saw the recording, she collapsed. It finally sank in who she had married. A man capable of setting fire to his seven-year-old mother-in-law to take possession of the land and the family businesses. The mask fell completely. The police went after him, but Richard had already disappeared, taking what cash and valuables he could gather. A search of the house revealed more evidence. The gas can hidden in the garage, searches on his computer about how to start a fire and make it look like an accident, and most frightening, a life insurance policy in my name that he had taken out months earlier, forging my signature. There, lying in that hospital bed, with 60% of my body covered in burns and scars, I understood that I had been born again. The fire that should have killed me ended up being the start of a new life, one in which I would use my mother's ancestral knowledge, not just to heal myself, but to help others who went through the same suffering. The herbs that saved my skin began to spark interest in the doctors themselves, who watched in wonder at a recovery they didn't believe possible. But hold on, before going straight to the end, I have to start this story from the beginning of my life so you understand how I ended up in that situation, and mainly, how I managed to survive. We only understand the present when we know the past, as my late mother used to say. And my past, my son, has more twists than the Colorado River, winding through this Arizona land. I was born in Sedona, in the year 1945, when these parts didn't even dream of asphalt or electric light properly. My father, Joseph Miller, was a ranch hand, one of those strong and silent men who spent weeks driving cattle and loaded mules through the trails of the high desert, taking what was produced in the backcountry to Flagstaff and bringing back what came from outside. A hard man, a few words and many calluses on his hands, but he had gentle eyes when he looked at my mother and me, the only daughter who survived after 5 who were born dead. My mother, Hazel. She was a woman to take your hat off to, a midwife of great skill, one of those who brought children into the world solely with the wisdom she inherited from her mother, who in turn learned from her grandmother. They said in the region that Hazel Smith's hands were blessed, that she had never lost a laboring mother or a baby when called in time. She knew every herb of the desert by smell, by the shape of the leaf, by the bitter or sweet taste. She knew which was good for fever, which stopped bleeding, which brought down a girl's delayed period, which healed wounds that didn't heal with pharmacy medicine. Our house was simple, adobe, low roof, beaten earth floor, but it had a huge backyard where my mother cultivated her medicinal herbs. I grew up there, among the rosemary, the rue, the lemongrass, the fennel, the basil. Since I was tiny, around 7 years old, I already helped her harvest, dry, and prepare the remedies. While other girls my age played with dolls, I learned the difference between the leaf that cures and the one that kills, between the root that lowers fever and the one that induces vomiting. Margaret. My mother always said while she macerated some herb in the wooden mortar my father had made for her, "Pay attention to what I'm doing. One day you're going to need this." And I paid attention with that curiosity of a child who doesn't quite understand the importance of what she's learning, but absorbs everything like a sponge. I learned to recognize each plant, not just by appearance, but by smell, by texture, by the time of year it bloomed best. I learned that some should only be harvested at the full moon, others at the waning moon, that some work better fresh, others need to be dried in the shade. One of my mother's specialties was precisely burns. Back then, with wood stoves, kerosene lamps, bonfires for making soap or roasting coffee, accidents were common. Now and then, someone would arrive desperate, with singed skin, looking for help. I remember like it was today the first time I saw my mother treat a severe burn. I must have been about 8 years old. They brought a man who had fallen into a vat of boiling molasses. Half his body looked like raw meat, truly raw flesh. The smell was horrible, and the screams of pain even more so. My mother wasn't shaken. She told everyone to leave the room, except me. "Stay here and pay attention, because one day you might need to do this," she said with that calm that only someone who has seen everything in life possesses. I saw her clean the wounds with an infusion of mesquite bark and sage leaves. Then she applied a thick paste made of aloe vera, grated prickly pear, jojoba oil, and other herbs she had gathered at dawn with the dew still on them. On top, banana leaves or broad corn husks to keep it moist and cool. The man, who arrived almost dying, walked out after 3 weeks of treatment. He was left with scars, of course, but he saved his life and his limbs, which the town doctor had said would need to be amputated. School was a luxury I barely knew. I learned to read and write with a teacher who came to give private lessons at home once a week, paid with chickens and eggs my mother offered in exchange. But my true education was there, in the herbal garden, accompanying my mother in births, treatments, and blessings. Knowledge that doesn't come in any book, that is only learned by doing, seeing, touching, smelling. At 16, I was already known in the region as the midwife's daughter, and they already called me to help when my mother was busy with another case. It was around this time I met James, my first husband. He appeared at our house one day, bringing his younger sister, who was in complicated labor. He was 26, handsome in a rough way, worked with cattle on a nearby ranch. He looked at me in a way that made me blush to the roots of my hair. After that day, he started showing up frequently, always with some excuse. He had a headache and needed a remedy. He had hurt his finger and wanted a bandage. He brought a chicken as a gift, a pumpkin from the field, a piece of honeycomb. My father didn't like him. He said he had the eyes of a snake, the kind you don't trust. But I, a fool, was enchanted. At that age, we confused desire with love, attention with true care. We married in less than 6 months of dating, a simple ceremony at the Church of St. Joseph, right there in Sedona. I moved to his house, a shack even simpler than my parents', at the back of the ranch where he worked. It was there I met the real James. The charm lasted less than the honeymoon. In the first month, the screaming started. In the second, the shoving. In the third, the first slap across the face. I tried to go back to my parents' house, but my father, with that old mentality, said a married woman only leaves home as a widow. My mother, more sensitive, gave me herbs to hide in his food to calm his nerves. It worked for a few days, then everything returned. The drinking made things worse. On weekends, when he got his pay, He spent half at the saloon before getting home. And then, God forbid and protect me, it was praying for him to pass out drunk before finding me. 3 years I lived in this hell. 3 years of constant fear, of bruises hidden under long sleeves, of flimsy excuses for indiscreet questions about black eyes or a split lip. I never got pregnant during that time, and today I thank God for that. What fate would a child born in that environment have? My mother said it was because I secretly drank the rue tea she taught me, but I really think it was divine protection. The end of this marriage came tragically, but I confess it brought relief. On a night of heavy drinking, riding back from the bar on his horse, James fell into a ravine. Horse and rider rolled down the embankment. The animal survived with a few scratches. My husband didn't. He broke his neck in the fall. When they came to give me the news, I felt a mixture of shock and liberation that gives me a guilty conscience to this day. I don't wish evil on anyone, but that night I slept in peace for the first time in 3 years. It is a heavy, complex emotion to process, but let's be honest, sometimes survival feels a lot like relief. This tragic twist of fate didn't just end a nightmare. It cleared the path for Margaret to return to her roots, mastering the very skills that will save her life years down the road. I went back to my parents' house, now as a respected widow and not a runaway wife. I resumed learning with my mother, who continued teaching me everything she knew about medicinal herbs, births, cures. Her knowledge seemed endless. Every plant, every root, every tree bark had a purpose, a right way to be prepared, a right time to be gathered. Everything in nature has its time and place, Margaret, she always said. The same plant that cures can kill if used at the wrong time or in the wrong way. 2 years after returning to my parents' house, I met Robert. He was the owner of a small general store in town, a widower, 20 years older than me, with a grown son who lived in Phoenix. It wasn't love at first sight like with James. It was something that grew slowly, based on mutual respect and affinity. He came to buy medicinal herbs from my mother to resell in the store, and we always talked a little. One day he invited me for coffee in the plaza, then to Sunday Mass, then to have lunch at his house. Robert was the opposite of James in everything. Gentle, polite, hard-working. He never raised his voice at me, much less his hand. When he asked me to marry him 6 months later, I was afraid. The first marriage had left scars on my soul deeper than any burn. But my mother, wise as always, said, "Daughter, not every man is the same. This one has the look of a good person. Give him a chance, and yourself too." We married on a Sunday morning, in the same church where I had married James years before. The ceremony was small but beautiful. Robert had saved up to throw a modest party, with cake, soda, and even a country band playing fiddle for us to dance. It was the first time I felt truly happy in many years, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I moved into his house, a simple 2-story, but well-kept, behind the store. There we started our life together. In the first months, I continued helping my mother with births and treatments, but gradually I got more involved with the business. I had a knack for it, I discovered. I knew how to deal with customers, negotiate with suppliers, keep the accounts up to date. Robert jokingly said I was born to be a merchant, not a healer. 1 year after the wedding, I got pregnant. At 23, after thinking I would never be a mother, I felt that life growing inside me. The pregnancy was smooth, without complications. Sarah was born on a hot December night, pulled by her own grandmother's hands. My mother insisted on being the midwife, even though her health was already fragile. "This girl is going to be special," she said as she cleaned the blood and fluids from the newborn. "She will carry the family name with honor." Sarah's arrival changed everything. Suddenly, that little store seemed too small for our dreams. We wanted to give our daughter what we didn't have: complete education, comfort, opportunities. Robert, who was always cautious with money, started to take more risks. He expanded the store, diversified the products, bought a neighboring lot to build a larger warehouse. I helped with everything, always with little Sarah nearby, in a basket between sacks of beans and rice. Little by little, year after year, the business grew. From the small neighborhood grocery, we evolved into a market, then into a medium-sized supermarket. When Sarah was 10, we already had 3 stores in Sedona. Robert had a head for business, and I complemented it with my way of dealing with people. He took care of the numbers. I took care of relationships. He thought about immediate profit. I about long-term growth. We balanced each other perfectly. With the money coming in, we started investing in land. The Arizona high country was always good land for those who know how to work it. We first bought a small ranch on the outskirts of town, where we planted vegetables to supply our own stores. Then a larger ranch, where we raised cattle and planted corn, beans, squash. Over time, we became a reference in local commerce. Miller's markets, as they became known, were synonymous with quality and fair prices. Sarah grew up in this environment of work and prosperity. Since she was little, she accompanied her father in the stores, helped me check merchandise, learned to do math even before starting school. Unlike me, she had a complete formal education. Robert insisted. "My daughter is going to be a doctor," he said with pride when she brought home good grades. And she was. She graduated in business administration at Arizona State University in Tempe. She returned to Sedona, ready to modernize the family businesses. Life was going well, prosperous, calm. I divided my time between the markets and the herbal knowledge I inherited from my mother, who had already departed to the other side when Sarah was 15. I didn't do births anymore. Times had changed. Now there was a hospital and doctors in town, but I continued preparing natural remedies. I kept a little corner in the back of the house, full of medicinal herbs, and attended to those who sought me out. I didn't charge. It was more a community service, a way to honor my mother's legacy. It was when Sarah turned 36 that Robert began to get sick. First, it was small things: tiredness, joint pain, lack of appetite. We thought it was just age arriving. He was already 75 after all, but the symptoms got worse. Tests revealed pancreatic cancer, already in an advanced stage. A matter of months, the doctor said, with that coldness of someone who has given this news hundreds of times. I tried everything. I searched my herbal knowledge for something that could at least alleviate his suffering. I prepared teas, poultices, baths. They worked for a while, took away a bit of the pain, gave a few hours of peaceful sleep, but the cancer continued its relentless work, consuming my husband from the inside. He wasted away, little by little, losing weight, losing strength, but never his good humor and dignity. On a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset tinge the red rocks of Sedona with gold, Robert held my hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated. "Margaret," he said with a weak but firm voice, "you gave me the best years of my life. We built something beautiful together. Promise me you'll continue, that you won't let it end." I promised with tears in my eyes. 2 days later, he passed away serenely, sleeping with his head on my lap. Widowhood this time came with a different pain. Not the guilty relief I felt when James died, but a deep sadness, an immense void. At the same time, there was a lot of work ahead. The businesses couldn't stop. There were employees who depended on us, a chain of 5 markets to manage, land to care for. Sarah took over the administrative part, taking care of the numbers, hiring, large-scale purchasing. I continued with what I always did best: dealing with people, maintaining relationships with old suppliers, preserving the family image in the community. For 10 years, we went on like this, expanding the businesses even more. We opened 3 more stores in neighboring towns, bought more productive land. Sarah, who was already past 40, dedicated herself entirely to work. She never married, never had children. I sometimes worried about that. I thought she should build a family, as we used to say in the old days. But she always said the businesses were her life, that she didn't miss a husband or children. Until one day Richard appeared tall, handsome, smooth-talking, with that way of someone who knows things. He arrived as a representative for a cleaning products distributor, wanting to sell to our market chain. Sarah, usually so practical and direct in negotiations, was enchanted. She accepted his quote without blinking, even though it was more expensive than our usual supplier. When I asked the reason, she shrugged. I thought the quality was better. In the following weeks, Richard appeared with increasing frequency at the headquarters of Miller's Markets, always with some commercial excuse, always looking for Sarah. Soon they were having lunch together regularly, going out for dinner, going to the movies in the neighboring city. Sarah, who never showed much interest in relationships, seemed like a love-struck teenager. She talked about him all the time, laughed for no reason when he called, bought new clothes for dates. In the beginning, I was happy for her. She was already 51. I thought maybe it was her last chance to know love, to have a family. Richard was younger, about 40, but that didn't seem like a problem. He was polite to me, called me mom, brought gifts, told funny stories at Sunday lunches. He seemed too perfect, actually. And my mother always said, "Be suspicious of what seems too perfect, Margaret. Nature is full of contrasts. Nothing is only good or only bad." 6 months after they started dating, Sarah announced that Richard was going to move into our house. The 2-story house where we lived, the same one Robert had renovated years ago, was big enough for the 3 of us, she argued. Besides, he had sold the apartment he rented to invest in a new product line. I didn't look favorably on it, but I bit my tongue. Sarah was an adult woman, boss of her own life, and I was already too old to make a fuss. It was after he moved in that things began to change subtly. First, small comments about how the markets could be modernized. Then, sharper suggestions about changes in administration, suppliers we should change, employees we should fire. Sarah, always so sure of her commercial decisions, began to yield on everything. "Richard has experience in the field, Mom," she said when I questioned. "He knows important people, knows how things work nowadays." In a few months, he was already participating in all the important meetings, opining on all decisions, had access to the company bank accounts. He began to distance Sarah from the older employees, saying they manipulated her because they had known her since she was a girl. He replaced the general manager, who had worked with us for 20 years, with a friend of his from the capital, changed traditional suppliers for companies that, curiously, always seemed to have some connection with his friends or relatives. The control went beyond business. He began to question Sarah's outings, criticize her clothes, monitor her calls. "It's because I worry about you, love," he said when she complained. And she, who was always a strong and independent woman, seemed increasingly faded, more insecure. With me, the treatment also changed. The affectionate mom gave way to comments about my age, about how I was becoming forgetful, about how dangerous it was for me to still take care of important aspects of the business at this age. Have you ever wondered how far someone would be capable of going for money? Do you think I noticed the danger signs too early or too late? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had that intuition you ignored and later regretted. Because looking back, the signs were all there, lighting up like Christmas lights, but sometimes we close our eyes to what we don't want to see. The turning point came when I caught him digging through Robert's office, which we kept intact since his death, like a kind of memorial. Richard was rummaging through the desk, opening drawers, leafing through old documents. When I questioned what he was doing there, he gave a sickly smile and said he was looking for inspiration to modernize the company. But I saw in his hands what he was really looking for: the original deeds to our land, the market foundation documents, the old bank records we kept as a precaution. That same night, talking to our trusted accountant, I discovered that Richard had requested from her a complete list of all family assets, all bank accounts, all real estate. When I asked why she didn't consult me before providing this information, she answered astonished, "But Mrs. Margaret, he came with a power of attorney signed by you and Miss Sarah, giving him full powers." My blood ran cold. I had never signed such a document, which meant the signature was fake, or worse, that Sarah had signed for me, convinced by him. I decided to investigate further, discreetly. I asked a nephew who worked at the county recorder's office to check if there were recent movements involving our properties, and there were. Richard had initiated the process of transferring 2 of our most valuable ranches to his name, using a power of attorney supposedly signed by me. The net tightened when I found hidden in his and Sarah's room a notebook where he practiced copying my signature, page after page of increasingly perfect attempts to reproduce my name. along with a flash drive containing photos of all our important documents, including wills, deeds, contracts. That notebook is the smoking gun Margaret needed, proving this was a cold, calculated crime rather than a simple misunderstanding. But if you think this undeniable evidence is enough to finally wake Sarah up to reality, you are in for a frustrating surprise. I confronted Sarah with this evidence. She denied it at first, said I was getting paranoid, that it was all in my head. But when I showed the forged signatures, the practice notebook, the transfers in progress, she collapsed. "Mom," he said, "it was just to make things easier, so you wouldn't have to worry about bureaucracy at your age," she cried, finally seeing the dimension of the deception. She said that later he would return everything to the family name, that it was just a practical matter to get better financing to expand the business. Poor thing. Even at 51, even being a successful businesswoman, she had been completely manipulated by that crook. We decided to confront him together that same night. His reaction was frightening. First, he denied everything, called me a senile old woman, said I was trying to poison my daughter's mind against him. When I showed the concrete evidence, he changed tactics. He said he was just looking after the family's interests, protecting the assets that I, an old woman with no clue about modern business, was putting at risk. Finally, when he saw we weren't buying his lies, he showed his true face, threatened. He said he had copies of all documents, that he knew powerful people who could make our life hell, that I wouldn't live long enough to see the end of a lawsuit. Sarah, horrified by that side of the man she thought she knew, asked him to leave the house immediately. He laughed mockingly. "This house is as much mine as it is yours. Now I have documents that prove it." The next day, very early, I went to the notary with our trusted lawyer. I changed my will, ensuring that all properties would go to Sarah, with a specific clause preventing any transfer to Richard or his relatives. I notified all banks about the fraudulent powers of attorney. I warned the store managers that he no longer had authorization to represent Miller's Markets. I changed the locks on the house and hired a security guard to stay at the door for a few days. Richard disappeared for almost a week. Sarah oscillated between regret for having been so foolish and anger at having been deceived. We started the legal process to annul all the transfers he had initiated, to prove the forgery of signatures, to ensure the protection of our assets. We thought the worst had passed, that he had understood the message and given up. How wrong we were. Richard returned after a week as if nothing had happened. He appeared one afternoon with a bouquet of flowers and a repentant face that not even a soap opera actor could do better. He asked to talk to Sarah, said he had reflected on his actions, that he was deeply sorry, that it had been a moment of weakness. My daughter, who was always tough in business but soft in the heart, wavered. I saw in her eyes that she wanted to believe, that she was looking for any excuse not to throw away months of relationship. The dream of a family that was beginning to wither with age. "He seems sincere, Mom," she told me after Richard left, promising to return the next day to talk better. "Everyone deserves a second chance." I shook my head in disbelief. "Sarah, this man forged documents, tried to steal our properties, threatened us. What kind of second chance does he deserve?" But she wasn't listening to me properly anymore. She had that distant look of someone who has already decided what she wants and just waits for the moment to announce it. In the following days, Richard executed a plan that only now, looking back, can I see how meticulous it was. He didn't move back in with us immediately. That would be too obvious. Instead, he courted Sarah like in the early days, calls, gifts, dinners out always with exaggerated respect for me when we crossed paths, calling me ma'am instead of the old mom, keeping his distance, making a point not to touch on business or money matters. Sarah started going out more and more, spending nights out, being distant when she was home. "We're restarting slowly," she said when I asked. "We're doing couples therapy." That sounded like an alarm to me. What therapist would advise a woman to reconcile with a man who had tried to rob her? I asked for the name of this therapist, the address of the office. She changed the subject, said I was being invasive, that it was her personal life. A month later, she informed me that Richard would move back in with us. "We've talked a lot, Mom." He understood his mistakes. I understood how absent I was in the relationship. We're going to rebuild together. When I protested, she was tough, as she had never been with me. It's my life, my choice. You accept it, or I leave home with him. And so the wolf returned to the henhouse with the hen's own approval. Things seemed calm at first. Richard kept a low profile, didn't meddle in business, was polite to me, although distant. But gradually I began to notice changes in Sarah. She consulted me less and less about market decisions. She transferred some important meetings to times when I usually rested. She began to question some of my decisions in front of employees, something she had never done. One afternoon, arriving at the headquarters earlier than usual, I accidentally overheard a conversation between Richard and the new general manager, the one he had recommended. They were talking about restructuring, cutting dead weight, modernizing radically. When they mentioned that stubborn old woman who won't let go of the bone, I didn't need much to understand they were referring to me. I confronted Sarah that night. She denied there was any plan to remove me from the business. She said I was imagining things, that perhaps I needed to rest more. It was the first time the seed of doubt about someone's mental sanity was planted. Not about mine, but about Sarah's. How could she not see what was happening? How could she defend a man who clearly manipulated her to get to our assets? But then I remembered the stories my mother told about women who suffered violence, not physical, but psychological, from their husbands. How they became blind to the obvious, how they justified the unjustifiable, how they became accomplices of their own tormentor. The following weeks were of increasing estrangement. Sarah stopped having dinner with me, saying she preferred to wait for Richard to arrive, even if it was late. Family gatherings on Sundays, a tradition since Robert's time, became increasingly rare. Important calls about the business no longer went through me. One morning, upon arriving at the central office of Miller's Markets, I was barred at the entrance by a new security guard. "Sorry, Mrs. Margaret, but I have orders not to let anyone in without authorization from Miss Sarah or Mr. Richard." I returned home furious, ready to confront both of them. I didn't find anyone. The housekeeper, Ashley, who had worked with us for 15 years, looked at me with a strange expression. "Mrs. Margaret, didn't you know? Miss Sarah and Mr. Richard traveled last night to Phoenix. They said they'll only be back next week. They hadn't told me a word, no message. As if I were a stranger, not the mother, not the founder of the business. I took advantage of their absence to clean out the home office. I don't trust that computer thing. I've preferred pen and paper forever. I rummaged through drawers, organized documents, separated what was important. That was when I found, hidden in a false bottom of Robert's antique desk, which he had put there to keep cash from the register without me knowing, as if I didn't know every secret of that furniture, a dossier on me. It was a folder full of official papers, most with the letterhead of a neuropsychiatrist from Phoenix. Reports detailing my alleged cognitive decline, my persecutory hallucinations, my irrational attachment to medicinal herbs. There was even a preliminary diagnosis. Clinical picture compatible with early-stage senile dementia, with episodes of paranoia. All signed by a doctor I had never seen in my life. Along with the medical reports, a petition ready to be filed in court, a request for interdiction. Sarah requesting full guardianship over me, alleging mental incapacity. The document, already signed by her, I recognize my daughter's handwriting even in the dark, listed all family assets, all properties, all markets. On the paper, it was written that I was no longer in a condition to manage any of that I was putting the family assets at risk with irrational decisions and erratic behavior. The ground disappeared from under my feet. My own daughter, my only daughter, planning to declare me crazy to take control of everything we built together. Richard's influence was clear in every word of those documents, the style, the expressions, even the type of accusation. But the signature was hers, the betrayal was hers. That night I didn't sleep. I cried until I had no more tears. Then I just lay looking at the ceiling, trying to understand where I had gone wrong in raising that girl. Had I spoiled her too much? Given the wrong example? Or was it really the manipulation of that man, so strong as to turn a daughter against her own mother? In the morning, with eyes burning from crying so much, I made a decision. I wouldn't be declared crazy without a fight. I called our oldest lawyer, Mr. William, who had taken care of the family business since Robert's time. I explained the situation, showed the documents. He turned pale. "Mrs. Margaret, this is very serious. An interdiction, once decreed, is almost impossible to reverse. You would be like a child before the law, unable to decide anything about your life or your assets." I asked what we could do. Anticipate, change the will now, create legal safeguards, and, mainly, get an independent medical report proving my full mental capacity. We spent that week taking action. I had exams with 3 different neuropsychiatrists, all attesting that I was in full possession of my mental faculties. I changed the will, placing clauses that would prevent any attempt at interdiction from altering the distribution of assets. I created a trust with part of the money under the administration of trusted third parties to ensure I would have resources even if I lost control of the rest. Mr. William even suggested I transfer some properties to the names of trusted nephews as an additional guarantee, but that I couldn't do. Deep down, I still didn't want to believe my daughter would go to the point of leaving me helpless. Sarah and Richard returned from Phoenix on a Saturday. They seemed tense when they entered the house, looking around as if searching for something out of place. They greeted me with distant formality, asked if everything had gone well in their absence. I replied yes, that it had been a productive week. I didn't mention what I had discovered or the measures I had taken. I wanted to see how far they would go. I didn't have to wait long. On Sunday, during a silent and uncomfortable lunch, Sarah finally broached the subject. "Mom, we're worried about you. Since Dad died 15 years ago, you've never slowed down. At your age, you should already be resting, enjoying life, not stressing over business." I replied that I felt perfectly fine, that work kept me alive, that I saw no reason to stop. Richard intervened. "Mrs. Margaret, we only want what's best for you. You've been having some lapses, some confusion." We both noticed, the employee's comment. His cynicism was so great I almost choked, but I stayed calm. "Funny, my doctor doesn't think so. In fact, I had some complete exams this week. Want to see the results?" The faces of both froze. Sarah stammered. "What exams, Mom? Why did you do that without telling me?" Richard quickly recovered his composure. But doctors from here in the country might not notice subtle signs. We consulted a specialist in Phoenix, one of the best in the state. He recommended you undergo a more complete evaluation, perhaps even a stay in a specialized clinic." That was when I put my cards on the table. "Are you talking about Dr. Stevens? The one who signed a diagnosis of senile dementia without ever examining me? The one who prepared the documents for the interdiction process that you, Sarah, were going to file against me?" They both paled. Sarah started crying, babbling incoherent excuses. "Richard, always faster. Change tactics immediately. You've been digging through drawers, reading private documents. This only proves our point. Paranoid behavior, invasion of privacy." I cut him off right there. "Mr. William is already aware of everything. 3 specialists have already attested to my sanity. Judge Roberts, an old family friend, has already been informally consulted about this absurd attempt to interdict me. Did you really think I was going to be caught off guard like this? You underestimated this old lady." Richard's face twisted into an expression of pure hatred that gave me chills. She successfully outsmarted them. But that look in Richard's eyes signals a shift from calculated greed to dangerous desperation. A cornered predator is unpredictable, and Margaret is about to find out that winning the argument might have just put her in immediate, mortal peril. Sarah continued crying, now in uncontrolled sobs. Lunch ended there, with the 2 of them retreating from the table without saying anything else. That night, I decided I couldn't continue under the same roof as them anymore. I packed a small bag, put in the essentials documents, some medicines, 2 changes of clothes, Robert's portrait that always stayed on my bedside table. I planned to leave quietly in the morning, go to my niece Linda's house in the neighboring town, until things calmed down, and I decided the next steps. Dinner was a silent and tense event. We barely looked at each other. Richard drank more wine than usual, filling and emptying the glass several times with abrupt movements. Sarah poked at her food without appetite, still with eyes red from the afternoon crying. I ate little too, my stomach turned by the whole situation. When we finished, I retired to my room, saying I was tired and wanted to sleep early. I lay down, but couldn't fall asleep. My head was buzzing with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 plans. I heard muffled voices downstairs. Sarah and Richard arguing, although I couldn't distinguish the words. Around 11 p.m., the house finally fell silent. I lay in the dark, waiting for sleep to come. That was when I heard a creak in the hallway, light footsteps, someone trying not to make noise. At first, I thought it was Sarah, maybe coming to apologize, or even Richard in a rare moment of guilty conscience. But the steps didn't stop at my door. They continued to the end of the hall, then returned even lighter. I heard a noise of liquid being poured. A strong smell began to penetrate through the cracks of the door. Gasoline. My heart raced. I jumped up, but before I could reach the door, I saw the flash through the cracks. The hallway was already in flames. You already know the horror of what happened next. You know about the desperate jump from the window, the crushing impact on the rose bushes, and the agonizing weeks that followed in the ICU. But let me tell you what was going through my mind during those dark hours. But the image that haunted me the most wasn't the fire itself. It was that split second before I hit the rose bushes when I looked up. Seeing Richard watching from the shadows was expected, but seeing Sarah, standing at the window of her own room, watching the house catch fire with an empty, unreadable expression, that broke me more than the fall. That image haunted me more than the burns themselves as I lay in that hospital bed, secretly applying the herbal mixtures Jennifer brought me. I don't know how long I was unconscious after the fall. I woke up in an ICU, tubes everywhere, bandages covering most of my body, stabbing pain with every breath, every heartbeat. The doctor taking care of me didn't hide his pessimism. "Mrs. Margaret, I'm going to be frank. 2nd and 3rd degree burns on 60% of your body. At your age, the chances are very small. We are doing everything possible, but prepare for the worst." Little did he know that preparing for the worst was something I had been doing for the last few months. My daughter's betrayal, the attempt to declare me incompetent, and now this, trying to kill me in such a cruel way. Compared to this pain in the soul, even the worst burns seemed bearable. When the doctor left, I closed my eyes and concentrated not on the physical pain, but on memories. My mother's hands preparing remedies, her voice teaching the secrets of plants, the stories of cures that seemed impossible to official medicine. As I mentioned before, Jennifer, the nurse who had become my accomplice, continued to help me. One night, while changing my bandages, my grandmother also knew these remedies, Mrs. Margaret. Nowadays people forget this wisdom, trust only pharmacy drugs, but there are things the old folks knew, and science is still running after. The next morning, when I woke up from the heavy sedation they gave me to sleep, I found Jennifer beside the bed. "I brought some things you asked for," she whispered, showing a discreet bag. "I don't know if it will work, but what harm can it do? The doctors don't give much hope anyway." I applied it to the most severely burned areas, underneath the official bandages. The first sensation was intense burning, then a tingling, and finally, a relief that none of the hospital analgesics had managed to provide. We continued with this clandestine treatment for several nights. Jennifer brought the herbs, helped me with the application, then masked the smell with hospital alcohol so the doctors wouldn't suspect. Little by little I began to notice differences. The pain decreased considerably. The wounds the doctors said would necrose began to show signs of healing. The fever that came and went finally subsided. My body, which according to all prognoses should have been succumbing to generalized infection, was reacting, fighting, healing. The turning point arrived when the chief physician, Dr. Thomas, the very man who had doubted my survival at the start, caught me in the act. He entered the room at dawn, outside his usual rounds, perhaps suspicious of the inexplicable improvements of a patient who should be getting worse. He found Jennifer helping to apply the herbal ointment to a particularly ugly area of my arm. We expected an explosion of anger, threats of dismissal for her, a scolding for me. Instead, he approached curiously. "What is that you are applying, Jennifer?" Trembling with fear, she tried to explain. I interrupted. "Doctor, these are remedies my mother taught me." She was a midwife and healer in Sedona. She knew every plant of the high desert and its function. "I know you don't believe in these things, but I'm desperate. If I'm going to die anyway, what harm does it do to try?" I expected contempt, perhaps condescension. He surprised me. Mrs. Margaret, my grandmother, was also a healer back in rural Oklahoma. I saw her save people no doctor could help. I'm not one of those doctors who thinks only what comes from a lab works. He examined my wounds with attention, compared them with the notes he brought. He frowned, intrigued. "The areas treated with your remedy are healing much faster than the others. The infection we were expecting hasn't developed. Your general condition is improving when it should be worsening." He remained silent for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Continue the treatment. I'm going to prescribe fewer antibiotics and painkillers so as not to overload your system. I want to follow this recovery closely." From there, my treatment turned into a kind of unofficial experiment. Dr. Thomas, a man of science but with an open mind, meticulously documented the progress of the areas treated with my ointments compared to those receiving only conventional treatment. The difference was becoming increasingly evident. Other nurses were included in the secret, then a few more curious doctors. What started as clandestine therapy turned almost into a parallel protocol, still unofficial, but tolerated by the team. A month after the attack, I could already sit up in bed without help. 2 months later, I took my first steps, supported by a walker. The scars were ugly, of course. There is no miracle that makes skin burned to the 3rd degree return to normal. But where doctors predicted necrotic tissue requiring amputation, there was new skin forming. Where they expected antibiotic-resistant infections, there were clean wounds healing. Dr. Thomas didn't hide his astonishment. "Mrs. Margaret, in 50 years of medicine, I have never seen a recovery like this, especially in a patient of your age. While my body healed, my soul still bled with the betrayal." Sarah never appeared at the hospital. I learned from my niece Linda, who came to visit me regularly, that my daughter and Richard had given interviews to the local press, crying crocodile tears over the tragic accident that almost took my life. They told the story of a fire caused by a short circuit in the old wiring. They lamented the serious condition I was in. They even went so far as to organize a prayer vigil in the central plaza of Sedona. Behind the scenes, however, they were already moving to take control of everything. Using an old power of attorney I had given Sarah for medical emergencies, they managed temporary access to bank accounts, market shares, ranch management. They couldn't sell anything yet. The legal safeguards I created with Mr. William prevented that, but they were in operational command of all the assets I built with so much sweat alongside Robert. It was during this period, between painful dressings and sleepless nights, that I made the hardest decision of my life. Sarah, my only daughter, blood of my blood, would be treated as what she had become, a criminal. It didn't matter that part of the blame was Richard's manipulation. She was an adult woman, had free will, had chosen his side even knowing what he planned to do to me. The girl I carried in my womb for months, whom I breastfed, whom I taught to walk and talk, had died for me that night, standing at the window, watching impassively as the house caught fire with her own mother inside. I asked Mr. William not to reveal to anyone that I was improving. On the contrary, to spread discreetly that my condition was very guarded, that the doctors had no hope, that it was a matter of time. I wanted Sarah and Richard to lower their guard, to feel safe in their macabre plan. Meanwhile, the same lawyer meticulously prepared the criminal case against them. He secured the official footage from the neighbor's security camera, the definitive proof we needed showing clearly Richard leaving and returning at the time of the fire. He collected statements from hospital staff about my state upon arrival, smelling of gasoline with burns characteristic of deliberately set fire. He gathered proof of the previous attempt at fraudulent interdiction. When I completed 3 months in the hospital, I was strong enough to be discharged. I wouldn't go back to Sedona, of course. It would be like entering the wolf's den again. Linda offered her house in Flagstaff, a larger city 30 miles away. I accepted, but on one condition. No one besides her, her husband, and the doctors who treated me should know. To the rest of the world, including Sarah and Richard, I remained hospitalized, debilitated, fighting to survive. On the eve of discharge, Dr. Thomas came to talk to me. He was visibly moved. "Mrs. Margaret, you taught me something medical school didn't teach, that healing can come from many places, not just laboratories and big pharmaceutical industries. That knowledge passed from generation to generation, tested by time, deserves our respect." I thanked him emotionally, too. "Doctor, you gave me something equally valuable, the chance to unite the best of both worlds. Modern medicine saved my life in those first critical hours. My mother's herbs completed the work that antibiotics alone couldn't manage." He asked me that when all that was over, when justice was done, I returned to the hospital to properly document the treatments we used. Imagine how many other victims of severe burns could benefit from this knowledge. How many lives could we save combining the best of traditional medicine with this ancestral wisdom? I promised I would return, that I would share everything I knew. It was a way to honor my mother, to ensure that knowledge wouldn't be lost with me. If you also believe that the knowledge of the ancients still has power, leave a like there. Let's see if we reach 1,000 likes to show that Grandma's wisdom isn't superstition, it's science that time validated. Because deep down what saved me was exactly that, respect for what came before. The understanding that not everything ancient is obsolete, that grandmothers and great-grandmothers weren't ignorant just because they didn't have a diploma on the wall. I left the hospital in a regular ambulance, without sirens or lights in the middle of the night. The plan was for no one to see me, for the room to remain occupied for a few days, with Nurse Jennifer coming in and out as if she were still caring for me. Meanwhile, I would recover at Linda's house, away from the eyes of Sarah and Richard, gaining strength for what was to come next. My niece's house was modest but comfortable, on a quiet street in a residential neighborhood of Flagstaff. Linda, daughter of my younger sister who died early, was always like a second daughter to me. She took care of me in those first days out of the hospital, with a dedication that reminded me of myself caring for my mother in her last years. She prepared the herbs I indicated, applied the ointments to areas I couldn't reach, helped me with the exercises the physical therapists had recommended. It was there, regaining strength day after day, that I received the visit from Mr. William with the news we were waiting for. The criminal case was ready to be presented. The evidence was overwhelming. The security camera recording, medical reports attesting the fire was criminal, documents of the fraudulent interdiction attempt establishing the motive. "As soon as you feel ready, we can proceed," he said. "But I must warn you, it will be a difficult, painful process. The press will jump on it. The whole town will comment. Are you prepared for this?" I looked at my hands, still marked by burns, at arms covered in scars that would never disappear completely. I thought of the pain I felt that night, the despair of being trapped in a burning room. I thought of Sarah's betrayal, of Richard's calculating malice. "I'm ready," I replied with a firmness that surprised even myself. "It's not just for justice for me, it's so they don't do this to anyone else." That selfless determination is the true mark of a survivor turning into a warrior. Margaret is done hiding in the shadows, and the shockwave she is about to send through that town will be nothing short of legendary. The next morning, Mr. William filed the lawsuit. At the same time, I gave an exclusive interview to a trusted journalist, showing the scars, telling the whole story from the beginning, presenting the evidence. The bomb exploded. In a few hours, the news was in all local papers, then state. Soon it reached national news. Businesswoman tries to kill own mother in criminal fire to inherit fortune. Elderly woman miraculously survives son-in-law's attempted homicide. Doctors amazed at recovery of seven-year-old lady after severe burns. Sarah and Richard were caught completely by surprise. They thought I was still in the hospital between life and death. They didn't have time to run, to prepare a defense, to hide evidence. They were arrested preventively the same day at home, when police arrived with the arrest warrant. The image of them being taken away, handcuffed, made the nightly news. Richard screamed he was innocent, that he was being persecuted. Sarah cried in silence, head down, perhaps finally understanding the dimension of what she had done or allowed to be done. The trial of Sarah and Richard was set for 3 months after the arrests. In the meantime, I continued recovering at Linda's house, away from the stares and comments of the town where I lived my whole life. Sedona had turned into an uproar, with people commenting and taking sides, some believing my version, others swearing it was all the invention of a resentful old woman, as some sensationalist papers went so far as to call me. While the dust didn't settle, I focused on my total recovery. The scars, mainly on my legs and arms, were still very visible and would probably never disappear completely. But the pain had decreased a lot and mobility returned a little more each day. I started replanting in Linda's small backyard some of the herbs I had used in my treatment. It was my way of thanking them for saving me and ensuring I would have access to them to continue treatment. Dr. Thomas, the doctor who had attended me in the hospital, came to visit me once a week in Flagstaff. He had become really interested in the knowledge I inherited from my mother, Mrs. Margaret. Could you record these recipes and treatments? It's too valuable a knowledge to be lost, he said every time. I explained that this knowledge didn't work well just written on paper. It was something living that one learned by doing, observing, failing, and succeeding. The secret isn't just in the ingredients, doctor. It's in the way of harvesting at the right time, preparing with the right intention, applying at the right spot. But since he insisted so much, I started writing some things in a notebook. The types of herbs, where to find them, how to identify the most potent ones, the combinations that worked best for each type of wound. I wrote at night after Linda went to sleep, with the weak light of the lamp, trying to remember all the details my mother had taught me. It was a way to connect with her too, to feel that her knowledge was alive in me and could help other people even after I departed. One day, almost 2 months after my discharge from the hospital, I received an unexpected visit. Sarah had managed to get released on bail to await trial, thanks to an expensive lawyer she hired using market money. The bail was extremely high, but the family businesses, even with all the confusion, continued prospering and generating sufficient income. Richard, with a criminal record we discovered later he had pulled similar scams in other states, remained in jail. When I opened the door and saw my daughter standing there, with deep circles under her eyes and a face thinner than I remembered, I felt a lump in my throat. Part of me wanted to hug her, say everything would be okay, like I did when she was little and fell off the swing. Another part wanted to slam the door in her face, scream that I never wanted to see her again. I stood still, without reaction, until Linda appeared behind me. Let her in, Aunt, at least to hear what she has to say. Sarah entered head down, sat on the sofa in the small living room, trembling hands holding her purse. She stayed silent for a while, as if not knowing where to start. Finally, she raised her teary eyes. Mom, I didn't know. I swear on my father's soul I didn't know he was going to try. That he was going to do that to you. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. He convinced me you were going senile, that you needed supervision, that it was for your own good. I believed it because I wanted to believe, because it was easier than facing the truth. I asked with the most controlled voice I could manage. And what truth would that be, Sarah? She lowered her gaze again. That I married a con man, that I let myself be completely manipulated, that I put a man I barely knew above my own mother, who raised me alone, who gave me everything. Tears were now running freely down her face. Mom, I was the CEO of a market chain, made million-dollar decisions, and yet I was completely blind when it came to my personal life. How could I be so stupid? You weren't stupid, Sarah, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke. You were dismantled. We often think domestic abuse is just bruises and shouting, but the most dangerous kind is silent. It's called coercive control. Statistics show that 95% of domestic abuse victims experience psychological aggression prior to any physical violence. He didn't just steal your money, he hijacked your reality. He isolated you from your support system, me, until his voice was the only one you trusted. It is a psychological siege that can break even the strongest minds. I observed my daughter crying there, so vulnerable, so broken. It was hard to associate that fragile woman with the cold person who had stood at the window watching the house catch fire with me inside. You saw, didn't you? I asked finally. On the night of the fire, I saw you in your bedroom window watching while I tried to escape. She widened her eyes, horrified. No, Mom, I was drugged. Richard put something in my drink after dinner. I woke up confused, saw the fire, but thought I was having a nightmare. When I realized it was real, he had already dragged me to the room, locked me in there. He said he was going to call the fire department, that I shouldn't go out, that it could be dangerous. I wanted to believe her. Deep in my heart, I really wanted to believe, but I had seen so much betrayal in the last few months that distrust was almost a reflex. And why are you only telling me this now? Why didn't you come sooner? She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Because only now do I have proof. Mom, the police found a bottle of pills in Richard's car. Strong sedatives, the kind given to people with severe insomnia. His fingerprints are on the bottle, and they found traces in the wine glass I drank from that night. It's all in the reports for the trial. I asked Linda to get water for both of us. I needed a moment to absorb all that. If Sarah was telling the truth, and the police reports seemed to confirm it, then she had also been Richard's victim in a different way, but equally cruel. He had planned to get rid of me and manipulate my daughter until he managed to take control of everything. If I had died that night as he expected, would Sarah have survived much longer after? Or would she have been the next target when she was no longer useful? When Linda returned with the water, I asked Sarah, "How did you discover where I was?" She drank a sip before answering, "Mr. William, I begged him for weeks. He finally gave in, but made me promise I would only come if I had something concrete to prove my innocence. When the report on the drugs came out, he thought I deserved the chance to explain myself. I stayed silent for a moment, pondering. William was the most loyal lawyer we had, a personal friend of Robert's. If he thought Sarah deserved to be heard, maybe I should at least consider it. There's one more thing you need to know, Mom," Sarah continued, voice a bit firmer. "Now we've discovered everything about his plan. Richard had taken out a life insurance policy in your name, forging your signature. Millions that would be paid to him as the heir's spouse in case of accidental death. We also found documents transferring properties with your forged signatures, ready to be registered as soon as you weren't here to contest anymore. That didn't surprise me. I already suspected the plan was more elaborate and macabre than it appeared at first sight. What surprised me was what Sarah said next. Mom, I know you may never forgive me. I know what happened is unforgivable, even if I didn't know the worst. But I am willing to give up everything, the markets, the land, everything we built if that helps you move on. I've already instructed my lawyers to prepare the transfer papers for all properties exclusively to your name. I looked at my daughter, trying to see beyond the words. Was it a gesture of desperation from someone fearing prison? An attempt to buy my forgiveness with what, in the end, was already mine by right? Or was it genuine regret, a recognition of the evil that had been done, an attempt at reparation, even knowing some things can't be fixed? I don't want your properties, Sarah. I want answers. I want to understand how a daughter I raised with so much love could even consider that her mother was crazy, without even giving me the benefit of the doubt. She collapsed into tears again. I have no excuses, Mom. Only explanations, and not even they are good enough. Richard isolated me little by little, pushed me away from my friends, from the oldest employees, from everyone who could open my eyes. He said everyone was envious of our success, that they wanted to separate us. And I, in my idiotic neediness of someone who had never had a serious relationship, believed everything. When you started raising suspicions about him, I was already so involved in that distorted reality he created that I preferred to believe you were confused, paranoid, than to face that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The conversation continued for hours. Sarah told me details of the relationship with Richard she had never shared before, how he subtly controlled her spending, her clothes, her friendships, how he made her doubt her own memory, denying things he had said or done, how he isolated her not only from me, but from everyone who really knew her. It was the classic portrait of an abusive relationship, something I had seen so many times in other women throughout life, but never imagined would happen to my daughter. So strong, so independent, so successful. When she finally left, it was already night. I promised to think about everything she had told me, consider her side of the story. I didn't promise forgiveness. It wasn't something I could guarantee at that moment, but I promised at least to keep an open mind. Linda, who had discreetly withdrawn during the most difficult conversation, returned to the living room after Sarah left. "What did you think, Aunt? Do you think she was being sincere?" I sighed, emotionally and physically exhausted. "I don't know, honey. A mother's heart wants to believe, but I've been deceived too much lately." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay tossing in bed, thinking about everything Sarah had said, trying to separate what could be true from what could be manipulation. I remembered my mother and what she said about poisonous plants. "Some are obvious, daughter. They announce the danger in loud colors, in strong smell. Others are treacherous, seem harmless, even pretty. And when you realize, it's already too late." Richard was the second type. Charming, articulate, seemingly harmless but lethal. That analogy perfectly captures how she was deceived, proving her mother's wisdom applies to more than just botany. Now, with the nature of the poison fully understood, watch as Margaret turns her focus to brewing the strength she will need for the ultimate showdown. The next morning, I woke up with an idea. I called Linda and asked her to contact Jennifer, the nurse who had helped me at the hospital. I needed more specific herbs for an intensive treatment I planned to do. "The aloe I have here isn't strong enough," I explained. "I need that one that grows in the desert, thicker, more potent. And fresh chaparral, not this backyard city stuff. Mesquite from the canyon, cottonwood bark, jojoba oil, not those diluted ones they sell around here." Jennifer got the message and promised to get everything. 2 days later, she appeared in Flagstaff with a suitcase full of fresh plants, barks, roots, oils. "I had to go down to Sedona," she explained. "My cousin knows a forager who knows exactly where to find each of these plants. At the right point of maturation." I thanked her emotionally. It was exactly what I needed to speed up my recovery, to be strong enough to face the trial approaching. I set up a kind of small, improvised laboratory in the back bathroom Linda rarely used. There, away from curious eyes, I prepared my ointments, my infusions, my poultices. I followed strictly the recipes my mother had taught me, taking care of every detail: water temperature, maceration time, order of mixing ingredients. My hands, even marked by scars, remembered the way, as if they had their own memory. The base of everything was aloe vera, this miraculous plant ancients have used for thousands of years. Not the weak little aloe in a pot people have in apartments, but true desert aloe, with thick leaves, full of a transparent and viscous gel. For those of you listening who want to harness this, pay attention. You must harvest the leaf at the base. When you slice it open, you are looking for the clear central parenchyma, the gel. You must avoid the yellow latex layer just under the skin, known as aloin, as it can be irritating. This clear gel contains glycoproteins that reduce pain and inflammation, and polysaccharides that stimulate skin growth and repair. It is nature's own skin graft. I cut the leaves in half, removed the gel with a wooden spoon, never metal, which my mother said altered the properties, and mixed it with jojoba oil, an incredible healer. I then added powder of chaparral bark, known for its anti-inflammatory and healing properties. Chaparral is considered sacred by many indigenous cultures, and it's not for nothing. Its ability to help the body regenerate is impressive. The bark has to be harvested at the waning moon, when the tree's sap is more concentrated in the roots, and dried in the shade, never in direct sunday. Another fundamental ingredient was the inner bark of the mesquite, a resistant desert tree which my mother called the doctor of the forest. Mesquite has natural antibiotic properties, fights infections, and accelerates the healing process. The bark needs to be scraped delicately, only the intermediate layer, neither the outermost nor the innermost. It's meticulous work I learned by doing, observing my mother's skilled hands. I completed the mixture with a little grated yarrow, a plant less known outside the West, but precious to those who know how to use it. Yarrow has a potent analgesic effect, relieves pain, while the other herbs do the regeneration work. It has to be harvested in the morning before the sun gets hot, when the dew is still on the leaves. This care with harvest time isn't superstition. It's practical knowledge tested by generations about when active principles are most concentrated. I applied this ointment every night to the areas most affected by burns, legs, arms, part of the torso, and neck. I covered it with broad leaves to keep the humidity and for their own cooling properties. In the morning, I washed everything with a warm infusion of fennel and lemongrass that cleaned without aggressing sensitive skin. I repeated the process religiously, day after day, week after week. The results were visible. The deepest scars, which doctors said would never close right, were less inflamed, flatter. The new skin growing at the edges of the burns had a color closer to normal, less of the intense red from the beginning. The pain that woke me at night in the first months was now more a tolerable discomfort, a reminder that only appeared when I moved in a certain way. When Dr. Thomas came to visit me again and saw the progress, he was amazed. "Mrs. Margaret, this is extraordinary. Patients half your age, and with less extensive burns, would still be in recovery, with dressings, taking strong painkillers. You are practically recovered." I showed him the ointment I was using. I explained every ingredient, every stage of the process. He wrote everything down, fascinated, asking questions, wanting to understand the mechanism of action of each plant. "Modern medicine has a lot to learn from this knowledge," he commented, examining the texture of the ointment between his fingers. "Think how many of these plants must contain compounds not yet identified by science, substances that could turn into medicines to help thousands of people." I agreed, but made a caveat. "The secret isn't just in isolated compounds, doctor. It's in the combination, the synergy. One plant potentiates the other, balances side effects. It's like an orchestra. Each instrument is good alone, but together they make complete music." He understood what I meant. Traditional medicine and modern science didn't need to be enemies. They could complement each other, each bringing its strengths to create something more powerful than the sum of its parts. "When all this is over, Mrs. Margaret, you need to come give a lecture at the hospital. Residents, nurses, everyone needs to hear your story. Know this knowledge. It can save many lives." While my body healed with the help of herbs, my heart still bled with Sarah's betrayal. She had started calling me regularly, updating me on trial preparations, on new evidence the police had found against Richard. A more detailed search of the house revealed a hiding place in the false bottom of the wardrobe, where he kept documents of other victims, of other scams pulled in the past. We discovered Sarah hadn't been the first woman to fall into his clutches. There were at least 3 others before, all older, all with significant assets. One of these women, a widow from New Mexico, was found dead 2 years earlier, supposedly from natural causes. The police were now investigating the possibility it had been another crime by Richard, using poison or some method difficult to detect. His fingerprints were found on transfer documents for a house and considerable savings that belonged to the deceased. A pattern began to emerge. He seduced mature, lonely women with assets and then found ways to appropriate everything. As more details about Richard's true character came to light, I began to consider the possibility that Sarah really didn't know the extent of his plans. Maybe she had been manipulated like so many others before her. That didn't erase the fact she had doubted me, allowed him to infiltrate our lives, our businesses, but it cast a different light on her actions, less deliberate malice, more tragic naivety. In the week before the trial, I received an unexpected visit. Our trusted accountant, Mrs. Robinson, appeared at Linda's house with a folder full of documents. "Mrs. Margaret, I thought you needed to see this before the trial," she said, placing the papers on the table. They were detailed reports of all financial movements Richard had tried to make in the months prior to the attack. Blocked transfers, attempts to access accounts, loan applications using properties as collateral. "He was desperate for money," explained Mrs. Robinson. "More than we imagined. We found out he had huge debts with loan sharks, illegal casinos. He owed dangerous people, people who don't accept excuses. This explained the rush. The elaborate plan, but full of flaws. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. If he didn't get the money fast, he would probably be killed by creditors." The trial finally arrived. It was held in Flagstaff, not Sedona, at the request of the prosecution lawyers, who argued correctly that in a small town where the family was so well known, It would be difficult to guarantee total impartiality. The courtroom was packed. Local journalists, curious onlookers, distant relatives wanting to see the outcome of that story that had turned almost into a soap opera in the region. I entered the court with my head held high, wearing a simple but elegant dress Linda had bought especially for the occasion. The scars on my arms and neck were exposed. I insisted on that. I wanted everyone to see, the jury to see what that man had done to me, not for revenge, but for justice. So there would be no doubts about the gravity of the crime. Richard was brought in handcuffed, his face haggard from months in prison. He had lost weight, his face once clean-shaven, now covered by a poorly trimmed beard. But the eyes, those cold eyes that watched me through the flames, remained the same. When our gazes met, I saw a glint of hatred that made me shudder. There was no regret there, only anger at getting caught. Sarah entered right after, free, but visibly nervous. She had opted for a discreet look, no makeup, hair tied back, sober clothes. She seemed to have aged years in a few months. She sat next to the lawyers, avoiding looking at Richard, who occasionally shot furious glances in her direction. Probably blamed her for being discovered, for not being able to sustain the lies he had built so carefully. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses were heard. Hospital doctors, nurses, neighbors who saw the fire, the accountant who presented proof of attempted financial fraud. The high point was when they presented the recording from the neighbor's security camera, showing clearly Richard leaving the house minutes before the fire started and returning shortly after, watching from the shadows while the flames grew. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a lump in my throat, not because of Richard's presence. That man didn't intimidate me anymore, but having to relive all that, having to tell in detail the night that almost killed me, the betrayal that almost destroyed not only my body, but my faith in humanity, in family, in everything I always valued. I took a deep breath and began. I told everything from the beginning. How Richard entered our lives, how he gradually pushed Sarah away from me, how he tried to declare me incompetent, how he finally decided the only definitive solution would be to eliminate me. I described the horror of waking up surrounded by flames, the hallucinatory pain of burns, the despair of falling from the window. And then, with a steady voice, I told how I survived not just the fire, but the betrayal, the abandonment, the pain. I used the knowledge my mother taught me. I explained to the jury. Medicinal herbs, which many call old wives' tales, saved my life when doctors didn't give much hope. The wisdom passed from generation to generation, accumulated by centuries of observation and practice, allowed me to be here today, looking into the eyes of the man who tried to kill me to tell my story. On the last day, before the jury retired to deliberate, Sarah asked to make a statement. With a voice choked with emotion, she admitted her participation, even if indirect, in everything that happened. She recognized she had been manipulated, but didn't use that as an excuse. Seeing Sarah break down adds a complex layer to this tragedy, blurring the line between accomplice and victim. The verdict gave Margaret justice, but her reaction to her daughter afterward is perhaps the most surprising twist of all. I should have trusted my mother, who never gave me reason to doubt her. I should have questioned, investigated, instead of blindly accepting what a man I had known for a few months told me about the woman who raised me, who built everything we have today. I deserve to be punished for my negligence, for my weakness, for my complicity, even if unintentional. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. Richard was found guilty of all charges: attempted aggravated homicide, arson, forgery of documents, fraud, conspiracy. When they discovered his accomplices in other scams, he was sentenced to 32 years in prison, without eligibility for parole in the first 15 years. Sarah was considered an accomplice by omission, but with mitigating factors for having also been a victim of psychological manipulation, proven by forensic psychologists' reports and the evidence of sedatives. She received a sentence of 5 years, converted into community service and probation, plus the obligation to attend psychological therapy regularly. When the trial ended and everyone started leaving the court, Sarah approached me shyly. "Mom, she started, but couldn't continue, tears taking over. I stayed silent for a moment, observing that broken woman who was my daughter, my only blood in this world. So many emotions passed through me at that instant. Anger, hurt, disappointment, but also compassion. A pang of love that had never really disappeared. "Let's talk at home," I said finally. "Not here, not now." She nodded, grateful for the chance, however small, to rebuild something of what had been destroyed. I didn't promise complete forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. But I offered something perhaps more valuable. The possibility of a new beginning. The chance to build a different relationship, more mature, based not on idealized expectations, but on the imperfect reality of who we are. In the months that followed, Sarah and I began a slow and painful process of reconciliation. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the hurt returned with full force, when I wondered if I was being naive again. But little by little, step by step, we rebuilt some kind of relationship. She religiously fulfilled her obligations with the court, went to therapy twice a week, and gradually resumed her role in the family businesses, although with much less autonomy than before. I went back to Sedona, but not to the house where everything happened. That one I had demolished. I didn't want those memories. I bought a smaller, simpler house with a big backyard, where I replanted all the medicinal herbs I had used in my recovery. There, I created a small sanctuary, not just for me, but for anyone in the community who needed it. People began to seek me out, first shyly, then in increasing numbers, seeking relief for burns, wounds that wouldn't heal, skin problems conventional medicine couldn't resolve. Dr. Thomas kept his promise. He invited me to give lectures at the hospital in Flagstaff, where I told my story and shared the knowledge I had inherited from my mother. In the beginning, many younger and skeptical doctors turned up their noses, spoke of placebo effect and coincidence. But the results spoke for themselves. And gradually, even the most resistant began to recognize the value of that ancestral knowledge, especially when combined with the modern techniques they mastered. I forgave my daughter, but many say I was too foolish. What would you have done in my place? Would you forgive someone who doubted you and stood by the person who almost took your life? Or are some mistakes unforgivable even among family? I have no definitive answers. I only know that forgiveness was more for me than for her. Forgiveness isn't a gift for the sinner. It's liberation for yourself. Holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I chose to let go, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace in the final years of my life. Carrying that weight of hurt and resentment was like continuing to burn inside, long after the fire had been put out. Sarah was never the same again. The experience marked her deeply, perhaps forever. She became quieter, more reflective, less confident in her own decisions. In a sense, she lost her innocence. Not the romantic innocence of a girl, which she had lost long ago, but a kind of more fundamental innocence. The belief that the world is basically good, that people are essentially trustworthy. I don't know if that was a loss or a gain, maybe a bit of both. As for me, the scars on my body remained, some more visible than others, but it was the invisible scars that took longer to heal. The feeling of vulnerability, the fear of trusting, the nightmares that woke me sweating even on cold nights in the high country. Knowledge of plants helped me with physical scars, but for wounds of the soul I needed other medicines. Time, compassion for myself and others, the capacity to find meaning even in the most painful experiences. One of the most important lessons I took from this whole experience was about the nature of true knowledge. The knowledge I inherited from my mother wasn't in books, didn't have a diploma on the wall, didn't come with the stamp of approval from modern science. But it was real, it was effective, it was vital. It had been tested and refined by generations of wise women who carefully observed the natural world and learned its secrets not in sterile labs, but in daily practice, in the real needs of people. This knowledge was almost lost with me. If the fire had taken me that night, all those recipes, all those techniques, all those meticulous observations about the healing power of Sonoran desert plants would have disappeared too. It was this awareness that led me to start work I had never planned. Teaching, not just Sarah, who finally showed genuine interest in the knowledge she had always considered old folks' stuff, but anyone who wanted to learn. 3 years have passed since that night that changed everything. I look at my hands as I harvest aloe leaves in the backyard in the first morning light. The scars are still there, raised marks on once smooth skin, telling a story of pain and rebirth that is now part of who I am. Some people get uncomfortable when they see them for the first time. Look away, pretend they didn't notice, change the subject. I don't hide them. I carry these marks like someone carries medals from a war won against all odds. Today is a special day. The calendar on my wall reads 2025. It has been exactly 3 years since that night. Here I am, at 80 years old, more alive and active than many people half my age. 3 years ago, the experts said a 7-year-old woman with burns covering 60% of her body wouldn't survive the week. They didn't count on the desert living inside me. The house where I live now is different from the one consumed by fire. It is simpler, smaller, but much more welcoming, sitting on a quiet street in Sedona with a generous backyard dedicated entirely to the medicinal herbs that saved my life. I dedicated entirely to cultivating the medicinal herbs that saved my life. Aloe vera, chaparral, mesquite, prickly pear, sage, fennel, lemongrass, powerful plants my mother taught me to respect and use, and that I now teach others. What started as a personal garden for my own recovery slowly turned into a small support center for burn victims and other hard-to-heal wounds. In the beginning, it was just acquaintances, friends of friends, people from the community who heard about the old woman who survived the fire. They came shyly, half disbelieving, perhaps more out of desperation after conventional medicine failed to solve their problems. They left amazed at the results of the ointments, infusions, poultices prepared with plants from my garden. The fame spread. Soon, people started arriving from neighboring towns, then from other states. People with old burns that wouldn't heal, with infected wounds that didn't respond to antibiotics, with thick scars that limited movement. I charged nothing. Money was never a problem with the markets and land I still own. I asked only that if they got better, they help another person in need, in any way they could. "Mrs. Margaret, you are an angel," many said. I always laughed and replied, "Angels are a thing of the sky. I am very much of the earth. It is from the earth that the cure comes, my people." And I showed the plants, explained their uses, encouraged people to grow them at home, to pass the knowledge forward, because this wisdom cannot die with me, cannot be lost, as almost happened on that night of the fire. It is deeply moving to see her turn a personal tragedy into a lifeline for others, ensuring the fire didn't take her heritage. But saving this knowledge is one thing. Translating centuries of intuition into instructions for the modern world is a whole new challenge she is about to tackle. One of the first things I did when I finally felt strong enough was to systematically document all the treatments I knew. It wasn't an easy task. Much of this knowledge was in memory, in touch, in smell, in the trained eye to recognize the right point of maturation of a plant, the ideal texture of an ointment, how to transform this into words, into precise measurements, into instructions others could follow. Dr. Thomas, who continued being not only my doctor but a friend and collaborator, suggested a solution. "Mrs. Margaret, let's film you preparing the remedies, explaining every step. It's easier to learn by seeing than reading." And so we began documentation work that has lasted 2 years. Hours of video where I show how to identify the right plants, how to harvest them at the ideal moment, how to prepare different remedies for each type of injury. These videos didn't stay just for us. With the help of a team from Flagstaff Medical Center, we created educational material that is now used in training nurses and even some younger, open-minded doctors. We combine traditional herbal wisdom with modern scientific knowledge, explaining not just the how to do, but also the why it works, identifying active compounds in plants, mechanisms of action, interactions with conventional medicines. It was a silent revolution. In the beginning, many health professionals turned up their noses, spoke of alternative medicine without scientific proof. But the results were undeniable. Patients using combined treatments, conventional medicine, alongside natural remedies, recovered faster, had fewer complications, felt less pain, developed less limiting scars. Gradually, skepticism gave way to curiosity, then respect, finally partnership. Today, I have an official collaboration with Flagstaff Medical Center. Once a week, I go there to see patients with severe burns, always accompanied by doctors and nurses who want to learn. I bring my ointments, my infusions, apply them alongside conventional treatments. Results are documented, photographed, compared. It is no longer old woman's knowledge or popular belief. It is integrative medicine, recognized and respected. You revolutionized burn treatment in this region, the hospital director told me once. I disagreed politely. Doctor, I didn't invent anything new. I just rescued what was about to be lost. Knowledge my mother and grandmother already had, that came from the Native Americans and pioneers who knew the plants of this land long before any medical school existed. It's not revolution. It's a return to roots, to origins, to wisdom that has always been here, waiting to be recognized again. My daily routine starts early with the sunrise. I get up at 5 a.m., drink my strong black coffee, and go to the backyard to harvest the herbs I will use that day. It has to be at this time, with dew still on leaves before the sun heats up and alters active principles. I harvest with care, mentally thanking each plant, as my mother taught me. Plants feel, Margaret, she said. Treat with respect, and they will give you the best they have. After harvest, I separate everything on the big kitchen table. I wash leaves delicately, dry with clean cloths. I begin the preparation work. Some go to the wooden mortar, where they are macerated until they turn into paste. Others are cut into small pieces for infusion. Tree barks are grated to extract their fine powder. Natural oils of jojoba, rosehip, evening primrose are added in carefully measured proportions. Everything with patience, with total attention. Sometimes humming the songs my mother sang while she worked. Appointments start at 9. I transformed the front room into a kind of simple office, with a table, cabinets for medicines, a sink to wash hands. People arrive by appointment. Ashley, my helper, a girl from the community who got interested in the work and is now learning everything I can teach, organizes the schedule. I see on average 15 people a day, each with their story, their pain, their hope for a cure. Like Mason, a 10-year-old boy who suffered severe burns when his house caught fire due to a leaking gas tank. He arrived here with his face and right arm covered in thick scars that limited his movements and caused constant pain. His mother, desperate after watching her son suffer for 2 years even with medical treatment, heard about me through a hospital nurse. "You're our last hope, Mrs. Margaret," she said with tears in her eyes. I started an intensive treatment. Aloe ointment with jojoba oil, morning and night. Chaparral and mesquite compress 3 times a day. Baths of fennel and cottonwood infusion to relieve pain and itching. Lemon balm and chamomile tea to help sleep. All complementing, never replacing the medicines the doctor had prescribed. In 3 months, the scars were more pliable and less inflamed. In 6 months, Mason could bend his arm completely. The smile returned to his face, a face that had previously been etched with constant pain. Today, 2 years later, the scars are still there, of course, but they barely limit his movement or cause discomfort. And he comes every week to help me in the garden, learning plant names, developing an interest in medicine that perhaps one day will lead him to become a doctor. Or Mrs. Betty, an 85-year-old lady who suffered burns on her legs when she fell asleep with a lit cigarette. The wounds got infected, wouldn't heal, smelled of necrotic tissue. Doctors talked about amputation as the only solution. The family, desperate, brought her to me on a makeshift stretcher. "If you can't help, no one else can," they said. I prepared a special treatment. Aloe ointment with propolis, which has potent antibiotic properties. Poultice of cabbage leaves and green clay to detoxify. Compress of pomegranate peel tea, which fights resistant infections. 3 times a day, every day, without fail. The nurses from the clinic, who went to change conventional dressings, began to notice the difference in the first week. The bad smell decreased. The wound edges began to show new, healthy tissue. In 1 month, the infection had receded completely. In 3 months, the wounds were closed, with thin, pink scars where before there was rotting flesh. No amputation, no more suffering. Today, Mrs. Betty walks with the help of a cane. She comes to visit me regularly, quit smoking, and says she gained a 3rd life. The first was when she was born, the second when I saved her legs. Cases like these give me certainty that I survived for a reason. The fire that should have destroyed me ended up strengthening not only my body, but my purpose, my mission to keep alive this knowledge that was almost lost. As I always say, the fire that tried to kill me turned into light that makes me help others. It is a transformation, an alchemy of tragedy into purpose, of suffering into service. It wasn't an easy path, of course. Besides physical scars, I carry emotional scars that may never disappear completely. The feeling of vulnerability when I am alone at home at night. The startle when I smell smoke, even if it's just a distant bonfire, a neighbor's barbecue. The occasional nightmares where I wake up sweating cold, feeling again the heat of flames licking my skin. They are marks that are part of me now, that I learn to accept, to integrate into my story. And there is, of course, the relationship with Sarah, my only daughter, blood of my blood, whose betrayal hurt deeper than any burn. The reconciliation process was long, painful, full of advances and retreats. There were moments I thought we would never manage to rebuild anything resembling a mother-daughter relationship. Moments when hurt was so intense, I could barely look at her without feeling physical pain in my chest. But time, that great ally of those who have patience, was healing that wound too. Sarah followed to the letter all court determinations, community service, therapy sessions, restrictions on her freedom. More than that, she demonstrated genuine repentance, not with empty words, but with concrete actions. She assumed responsibility for the markets again, but with a completely different posture. Humbler, more consultative, more respectful with older employees, who had all the experience she despised during the period with Richard. The turning point in our relationship came about a year after the trial. Sarah had divorced Richard, obviously. He remained in prison, serving his 32-year sentence, without demonstrating any repentance or remorse. She had moved back to living alone in a modest apartment in downtown Sedona, avoiding the house where we lived together and where everything happened, which I ordered demolished. I couldn't stand even looking at that place. We were in a cordial but distant relationship. We talked about business when necessary. We exchanged formalities on dates like birthdays and Christmas, but nothing beyond that. Until one day she appeared at my door with a cardboard box full of dirt and some small, fragile seedlings. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "I found these plants on Grandpa's old ranch land, near the spring. I think they are those you always said were so hard to find. Wild aloe, the real one, not that potted store kind. I dug them up carefully, with the root ball and everything, so they wouldn't die on the way." I was speechless for a moment. They really were seedlings of Aloe ferox, or a potent wild variety, the most potent species, which only grows in some specific areas of the high desert, almost impossible to find these days with so much development. And even more impressive, Sarah had taken the trouble to go to that distant ranch, to look for the plant she previously considered unimportant weed, to dig it up with all care, preserving roots. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but loaded with meaning. Recognition of the value of that knowledge she always disparaged, an attempt to contribute to work that now gave meaning to my life. "Thank you, daughter," was all I managed to say with a choked voice. Those seedlings became the start of a new garden, a new connection between us. Sarah began to appear more frequently, to help cultivate plants, learn names, properties, uses. At first she was clumsy, awkward with dirt, with hands always impeccable of someone who spent the day in air-conditioned offices. But she was improving, developing the touch, the look, the patience necessary for this type of work. Gradually, our meetings in the garden transformed into moments of reconnection. Between one herb and another, between one recipe and another, we were rebuilding lost trust. Not in the same way. It would be impossible after everything that happened. But in a new way, more mature, based on recognition of each other's fragilities and strengths, on acceptance that we are human, imperfect, capable of both great mistakes and profound transformation. Today, 3 years after the fire, Sarah is a partner in my work. She didn't abandon the business. She continues taking care of the markets, which are now 7 spread across northern Arizona, but she dedicates 2 afternoons a week to the treatment center we set up together on the old land of the burned house. It is a simple but functional building, with rooms for care, a lab for preparing remedies, a greenhouse to grow more sensitive plants, and a small auditorium where we give lectures and workshops for health professionals, students, and anyone interested in learning. Sarah takes care mainly of the administrative part, organizing appointments, purchasing materials, accounting, contacts with hospitals and clinics for patient referrals. Her background in business and experience managing markets are valuable now in this new context. I continue being the heart of the project, the person who knows plants, prepares remedies, teaches procedures, but it is good to have someone trusted taking care of all the rest, allowing me to focus on what I do best. Reconciliation with my daughter was perhaps the biggest challenge of these 3 years. But there was another equally important one: reconciliation with my own transformed body. Burns left marks everywhere: legs, arms, torso, part of face and neck. At first, I avoided mirrors, wore clothes covering everything, felt ashamed when I noticed strangers' looks of strangeness or pity on the street. It was a patient who changed my perspective, Jessica, a 5-year-old woman who had suffered burns on her face and neck when a pressure cooker exploded in the kitchen where she worked as an assistant. She was in deep depression, didn't want to leave the house, thought she could never have a normal life again, a relationship, a family. Who is going to want a woman with a face like this? She cried during treatment sessions. One day, I took off the shawl I normally use to cover scars on my neck and part of chest. "Look at me, Jessica," I said firmly. "I am 80 years old, 60% of body with burn scars, and I am here living the most productive and meaningful phase of my life. These marks don't define me, don't limit me, don't stop me from doing anything I want. They are just visible evidence of a battle I won." She stayed silent for a moment, really looking at me, perhaps for the first time. "How can you see it like that? Not as something ugly, shameful?" I smiled. "Because I changed my perspective. They are not burn scars, they are survival marks. They are the map of my journey. They are proof I am stronger than the fire that tried to consume me." It is a profound moment of realization, transforming what was once a source of shame into a badge of honor. Margaret isn't just healing bodies anymore. She's healing souls. And you won't want to miss how this wisdom shapes the final chapter of her life. And then I told her my whole story. Not just treatment with herbs she already knew, but everything. Betrayal, attack, despair, reconstruction. When I finished, Jessica had tears in eyes, but they were different from self-pity tears she used to shed. "If you managed, after all that, I can too," she said with determination she hadn't shown before. From that day on, her recovery gained another rhythm. She started following treatment with total dedication, went back to leaving house, started talking more about future than past. Today, 2 years later, she is married, expecting first child, and works as volunteer at our center, helping other women who went through similar traumas. This experience with Jessica made me see my scars could be not a burden, but a tool, a living, visible, undeniable testimony that it is possible to survive worst and rebuild life with meaning. I stopped hiding them. I started wearing lighter clothes that left arms and neckline visible, without embarrassment, without drama, with serenity of someone who made peace with their own past. Scars are like rings in tree trunks. I always explain to patients struggling with self-image after severe burns. They tell the story of the tree, show drought years, forest fires it survived, periods of abundant growth. They don't diminish beauty or strength of tree. On contrary, they are part of what makes it unique, special, impossible to be confused with any other. This philosophy of life I developed in last 3 years attracts people of all types, not just patients with burns, but people seeking wisdom to deal with other types of visible and invisible scars. Journalists come to do reports. Medical and nursing students ask to shadow my work. Seniors from community show up just to talk, to hear stories, to feel that knowledge they carry also has value in a world that often discards them as outdated, useless, out of fashion. You are a living treasure. An anthropology professor told me once, who came to document my work for a project on preserving traditional knowledge. I laughed and replied, "I am just a stubborn old woman who refused to die when it was time, Professor, but I understand what he meant. I carry knowledge that is disappearing quickly, passed from generation to generation for centuries, maybe millennia. and that now runs risk of getting lost in avalanche of instant information, industrialized medicines, standardized treatments that characterize modern medicine. I am not against science, quite contrary. I have immense respect for doctors, nurses, researchers who dedicate lives to finding cures, alleviating suffering, prolonging existence. Without modern medicine, I myself wouldn't have survived those first critical hours after fire. What I defend is integration, partnership between traditional knowledge and contemporary science. Each has its strengths, its limitations. Together they can offer best treatment possible. It is this integrative vision that guides my work now. I don't want people to abandon their doctors, their medicines. I want to complement, enrich, offer additional options they might not find in conventional offices. And at the same time, I want to validate, document, preserve this ancestral knowledge so it doesn't get lost when I and other guardians like me are no longer here. That's why I dedicate so much time now to teaching. I have formal apprentices, young people from community who spend hours with me in garden and lab, learning to identify plants, prepare remedies, apply treatments, and I have thousands of indirect students through videos, handouts, lectures I produce in partnership with universities and hospitals in region. It is a race against time. I am 80 years old after all, even with all health and vitality herbs give me. Every day is precious. Every knowledge not transmitted is risk of permanent loss. When I look back at these 3 years since fire, I see journey of complete transformation. From victim who woke up surrounded by flames, to unlikely survivor with 60% of body burned, to respected healer who now teaches in hospitals and universities, the betrayed mother who almost died by hands of son-in-law, the woman who found strength to rebuild relationship with daughter who allowed betrayal. From elderly woman hiding behind shawls and long sleeves, to lady showing scars with pride as medals of war won against all odds. It wasn't journey I chose. If I could, I would have preferred 1,000 times to continue my quiet life before, managing markets with Sarah, growing my herbs in backyard just as hobby and family tradition, aging surrounded by comfort and safety. But life doesn't always give us what we want. Sometimes gives us what we need to grow, to transcend limits, to discover strengths we didn't even imagine possessing. I could have become bitter, resentful, paralyzed by trauma, could have hidden from world, dwelling on betrayal, feeding hatred. Instead, I chose to transform pain into purpose, suffering into service, personal tragedy into collective benefit. Not because of some special quality I possess. Anyone has this potential for transformation. Difference is in choices we make when facing extreme adversity. One of most important lessons I learned in this journey is about nature of true strength. It is not absence of fear, pain, doubt. It is capacity to keep going, even feeling all that. It is falling and getting up, breaking and rebuilding, crying all tears, and then wiping face and keep walking. It is looking at seemingly impossible situation and saying, I will find a way. I don't know how yet, but I will find. Another fundamental lesson was about power of traditional knowledge, of wisdom passed from generation to generation. We live in an era that values new, technological, scientific, often despising what came before as primitive or outdated. But there are treasures of knowledge accumulated by centuries of observation, experimentation, oral transmission knowledge that saved my life when modern medicine had little hope for me. Knowledge that now helps save other lives when combined with best contemporary science has to offer. And perhaps most difficult, most painful lesson, but also most liberating, about forgiveness. Not easy, automatic forgiveness often imposed on us as obligation, especially on us women. Forgive because it's family. Forgive because it's good for you. Forgive because it's right thing to do. No. True forgiveness comes from deeper, more authentic place, comes from recognizing person's value beyond mistakes made, capacity to see humanity even in most inhumane moments, understanding we are all capable of both good and evil, depending on circumstances, influences, choices. I forgave Sarah not because it was my obligation as mother, but because I chose to see her as complete person, with serious flaws, yes, but also with qualities, with capacity for genuine repentance, true change. Concrete reparation. Forgiveness didn't erase past, didn't eliminate consequences, didn't give us back exact relationship we had before, but opened space for something new, something different, something that maybe is even more authentic than what existed previously. As for Richard, I can't say I forgave him completely. Maybe I never will, and don't blame myself for that. Some actions are so extreme, so deliberately cruel, that forgiveness becomes almost impossible. But I managed to reach a point where I don't spend energy hating him anymore, where his name doesn't cause me that sharp pang of anger and fear in chest anymore, where I can think of him as deeply disturbed and dangerous human being, but still human. It is different type of liberation. Not complete forgiveness, but refusal to allow him to continue having power over my thoughts, my emotions, my life. Today, looking to future, I feel mixture of serenity and urgency. Serenity, because I found purpose that gives meaning to every day, because I made peace with my past and present, because I am at peace with transformed body I carry. Urgency, because I know time is limited, there is so much knowledge still to share, so many people to help, so much work to do before my journey in this world comes to end. But I have no fear. If I learned something from all this, it was that we are stronger, more resilient, more capable than we ever imagined. That even from ashes of worst destruction, something new can be born, something beautiful, something meaningful. That fire trying to consume us can ironically light a light that illuminates not only our path, but path of countless others coming after us. Now, as the evening shadows cast a purple hue over the red rocks of Sedona, I sit quietly, tracing the crisscross scars on my arms. They are no longer marks of pain, but rather rivers of memory flowing across this aged body. I have come to realize that humans are much like wild herbs. Our most resilient vitality comes not from peace, but sprouts from the very ashes of ruin. The wound, in the end, is simply where the light enters to heal us and teach us compassion. If my journey of rising from the ashes has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue planting seeds of hope together in the stories to come.